Once again, thanks for everybody for joining us. We have Emily Mayo about to give a presentation and yeah, basically do a Q&A after that on her work in game audio. She joined us, oh gosh, years ago. Was it 2016 or so?
I want to say it was
Yeah.
like 2014, 2015.
Okay, let's go with
Probably
that.
2015.
Okay, let's say 2015, and joined us for the Wise and Unity courses. And yeah, she's just had a great run of like working as a freelancer in the industry. And so, yes, here's Emily, and thanks for joining us.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to, I have a single slide with like some basic info and a couple of links if y'all want to like find me online. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pull that up and share it with y'all. It's less of a presentation and more of like a, I don't know, a helpful visual aid. Let's see. Um, and there it goes. Yeah. So, it just has some basic information about me. I thought I would just talk over the general trajectory of my career so far, because I don't know that it's necessarily been anything unusual, um, but I think it's always interesting to kind of like hear about the journey. So I graduated from the University of Texas in Austin in the year 2013. I had a classical composition degree, and I knew since I was like in high school that I wanted to be in game audio. Unfortunately, UT didn't really have much in the way of game audio training. However, they did have in my senior year, they started up a game development capstone program, and I got to be in the very, very first one of those classes. And up until that point, I music had been my main focus. I had the classical music degree, or rather, almost had it at that point, and everything. And I was always thinking in terms of being a musician in the games industry. But when I took that game development capstone class, I had to do sound design because I was frequently the only audio person on the teams I was working on, and games need sound effects too. um, so I think it is a pretty common experience for somebody to want to be in game music and then kind of have a realization that it might be easier to find work if they can do sound design too. And sometimes what happens with that is composers kind of struggle to get into sound design because it's not really something that they're super into. It's something that they kind of feel obligated to do. Um, and it sucks when that happens because, you know, I personally think that people should be able to that people should focus on the things that they actually want to do because we only have so much time on this earth. Luckily, I actually really liked sound design, and of course, I never gave up music, but I was more than happy and willing to kind of integrate it into my game audio study. So anyway, I graduated from UT, and at the time I was working at a restaurant at as a server, delivery driver, hostess combo. Um, and I didn't really have any like career leads because I had just graduated college and it was 2013, and game audio Twitter or in the online game audio community was not as active as it is now. So what happened is I got called in to do a delivery on my day off to deliver food to a studio called Edge of Reality. And it was the first time I had been inside a AAA game studio. I was starstruck and, of course, very desperate to get out of my terrible restaurant job. So, as they signed off for the food, I asked if they were hiring for any audio positions, and they said, maybe, here's a business card, send us your resume. And I was working there a month later. It makes for a great story, but it also makes for terrible advice. I don't I don't recommend anyone try that. I think it's a good way to maybe get you in some pretty bad trouble with your day job. Worked out for me though. I worked as a contractor on a Transformers movie tie-in game called Rise of the Dark Spark. It came out for like Wii U, Xbox One, no, I'm sorry, PS3 and like Xbox 360. It was like right at the tail end of that cycle. And it was a brief contract though. And while I learned a ton, it was very brief. Uh but in a way that's kind of a good thing because over the course of that job I kind of learned like okay, if I want to have an actual career and keep getting work, now I have a better understanding of the sort of things I have to learn. So immediately after that contract ended, I went to Austin Community College. I just took a year off to go back to school where I studied audio engineering and MIDI and synthesis and live sound. I took a programming class, I took a game design class, like I did all sorts of stuff. And while I was doing that, uh, I also took the School of Video Game Audio Wise class. So I had a very, and I was working too. I went back to the terrible restaurant job. So I had a very, very busy schedule for that year, very full course load. But I learned a ton. And at the end of it, um, it's actually really funny in retrospect. At the end of it, I was like, "Wow, okay, I'm done with school. I've worked so hard. I'm gonna like give myself a maybe like a week off to decompress and play Skyrim and just not do anything." And then I wake up the day after I've finished school and I'm about to relax to see that Every has put up a job for sound design. Every is a casino game company here in town, and they had been on my radar for a while because we actually toured their studio back when I was at UT, the game development capstone class I mentioned before. We did like a little tour of their studio, and um, and at the time I was like, oh, this could be like a pretty good place to cut my teeth, just because like each game is really short, and I would work on like a pretty wide variety of projects, and they seem to have a pretty active audio department, and anyway, I applied to that every job and I got it and I proceeded to work there for 5 years. And while I always kind of thought of casino games as like a starting point, it was never the ultimate goal. No disrespect to my old coworkers at Every. They were great. I worked with a lot of really great people there, but casino games just I'm not a gambler. I have a hard time relating to those games as like somebody who would actually want to play them. So the entire time I was at Every, I did every game jam I could. I did a bunch of like tiny little indie projects. I did a bunch of personal projects because I was trying to build out my resume so that I could hopefully eventually get back into AAA. And I did this for 5 years straight. And then the pandemic happened and all the casinos closed down. So first Every furloughed a bunch of us, and then a couple months later, they laid off, I think, like 2/3 of the staff, and that
Wow.
included me. Um, which, isn't great. It's not great that that happened to me, but it turns out that all of the networking and personal projects and all that stuff, all those things that I did in those 5 years, it paid off because I had a contract at Certain Affinity like 2 months after being furloughed. I was working again at Certain Affinity, working on a very cool project that I still am not allowed to talk about. And then a few months later, I got contacted by the fine folks at Arkane, and they brought me on for a more longer term contract, and that's where I am now. I'm working with Arkane Austin on a game called Redfall. I put some of the key art in on the little PowerPoint slide just so y'all can see it. I mean, I would put a headshot, but like y'all know what I look like. I'm right there. um, but yeah, that is essentially what my career has looked like so far, and that's where I am now. I'm still kind of getting used to calling myself a freelancer just because I was in-house at Every for 5 whole years. But just going from contract to contract and uh doing even like smaller like one-off commissions on the side, like now I am essentially freelancing full time. Like I had to hire a tax professional and everything. So I think that makes it official.
Hmm. Nice. No, that's great. So what I'll do is direct people to start asking questions. That's over, I guess, usually on the left side there, and the thing that says live event chat. I guess it's got a hashtag in front of it. And so you can type your questions in there and start asking questions. I'll just ask a question to begin with. As far as like what most people, I think anyways, are sort of curious about is that like, yeah, you sort of planted like, sort of like a garden of possibilities with, your different projects and whatnot. And how do you find sort of like on average, like, is there any sort of method or sort of like, common way that people sort of get in touch with you? Like, sort of like how do people find out like who you are and where you are for gigs?
That's a good question. So it kind of depends on the job. Um, and and there's been like a few different ways that people have done this. So like when it comes to the AAA jobs that I've worked specifically, those are 1000% just because of like meeting people in Austin, going to networking events in Austin specifically. Just I keep showing up to the game audio meetups. I went out to like the indie games events and just talked to people, and I made friends, and that was really it. Every AAA game job that I've gotten has just been a direct result of me meeting someone at an event and continuously meeting them at future events and just building relationships that way. Um, like actually like another connection, the reason I got the Every job was not just because of my reels and not just because of my education background or whatever. It's also because the head of the audio department at Every used to work at Edge of Reality with the person who had hired me there, so they
Mm,
knew each other, and he was able to put in a good word for me, and that stuff matters a lot.
hmm.
So as far as my AAA stuff goes, it's just meeting people in Austin, and it's a smallish community. Everybody knows each other, and just you build those relationships. People get a good impression of you, and that just helps a lot. When it comes to like other stuff, like I usually do like a handful of podcast commissions a year,
Okay.
and none of them are from people in Austin. They
Okay.
are all people from the internet, and
Right.
it's because uh it actually did start with somebody in Austin. I had a friend who was big into this podcast community, and she had a friend who needed a theme song for their podcast. So she was like, "Oh, you should check out my friend Emily. She's a composer. Here is her SoundCloud." And this person got in touch with me. I did their theme song in exchange for money. And this person went and told all of their podcast friends.
Nice.
and and this is like a network that is like all over the country. Just I don't know if they had like a Discord or something, just
Yeah.
full of actual play podcasters that all know each other. And so now once every few months, I I get somebody in my inbox who's like, "Hey, you did the theme song for so and so's podcast.
Yep.
I know them uh, through the internet, and they recommended you."
Yeah.
Uh, so that one's a bit more random, but it does kind of goes to show that word of mouth, even if it's over the internet, still totally counts. That still totally counts as like something that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that, from, I mean, I use Twitter a bit for the school. And so, yeah, like you can definitely see you're very, you're very eloquent, I find, on Twitter as far as being able to present yourself and your work.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, I think that people, they're just like, yeah, I have this vibe of what I want to promote with like my podcast. And then, it seems like she's doing the similar, slash same thing, and it'd be great to work with her. So, yeah, let's have a look at questions here. Okay. Yes, we've got a couple statements here. We've got Damien in the chat. Feel free, everybody else that's, signed up and listening, feel free to ask your questions over here in the live event chat. And there we go. I think, okay, I can ask another question as well. And so what I'll do is I'll do a 180 question on this one, which is sort of a continuation of what we were talking about before. So when you're a freelancer, I guess this is sort of how do you like structure your time? Because it's good to have like hobbies, like we are talking about, like, doing sort of DAW-less jam kind of things, playing around with like, various little electronic music boxes and stuff. But then how do you like sort of, mitigate your time, like with sort of, marketing, say like using Twitter or Facebook or whatever else, you're using. And then also, how do you get the job done? Like, how do you structure your time as a freelancer? How do you find like what sort of schedule works for you these days?
There is a lot in that question, and that's a
Yeah.
good one. This is something that I've really had to think a lot about over the course of this past year because before the pandemic hit, I was going into an office every day and I was working 9 to 5, and it was very structured. But um, as soon as the furlough happened, it was like I was like cut loose, and it was in a way freeing, but it was also terrifying because
Yeah.
I have ADD,
Oh, yeah.
and I literally have ADD.
Yeah.
So that means I'm forgetful frequently. I have inertia. I have issues starting to work because I keep getting distracted, or it's very hard to like push myself into work mode, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure y'all have seen all the various ADHD posts on Twitter or on Facebook. That's kind of in vogue now, and a lot of that stuff, a lot of overlap with ADD.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, like the first thing I did, I was like, okay, so now that I don't have a job anymore, I'm going to need to really take responsibility for my own time. I'm going to need to get a lot done because I need to get a new demo reel ready. I need to start hustling and looking for clients. That's a lot of work, and because I have ADD, I'm not always going to be as successful as I would like to be. So literally the first thing I did was start my daily recording
Mm.
thread,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe some of y'all have seen on Twitter.
Yep.
Starting on April 1st, 2020, I recorded one new sound a day and put it into my personal library. And I started doing that because I wanted to have something where if I just did this one thing in a day, then I have done something productive. I have added something to uh my situation as a sound designer that does help. If that makes sense. Like I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to have something that if I can get to the end of the day, and even if I didn't do anything else, at least I can point to my recording and be like, okay, but I did that. At
Yeah.
least I did this one thing. Uh, I've kept it up 400. I think today is day 498.
Oh wow.
Now, I've kept it up so far. I haven't recorded today yet, so
Yeah.
that'll be this afternoon, I guess.
Yeah. Well, congrats.
Um,
That's a
so
lot of
that's
focus.
the
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, so that's less about time structure though. The thing is that I have to keep my recording time really loose. I can't do it at the same time every day because every day is different. But I do, I have a bullet journal. This
Okay.
is
Yep.
a really big part of how I structure my time, and I like have a checklist for myself every day, and literally the first thing in the checklist is record.
Yep.
Um, so that's, I guess that is time structure related. I feel like I went on a tangent.
No, not
But
really. Yeah.
when it comes to structuring, when it comes to structuring the rest of my time, uh, work-life balance is something very important to me. It has been less important to me in the past, and it has come around to really bite me in the ass. So this is something that really matters to me now, and it's still a work in progress. I can't say that like I've never overworked myself or I no longer say yes to too many things or whatever, but I am a lot better than I was. Uh,
Hmm.
so towards that end, when I got furloughed, I was like, okay, so my general work hours, I'm going to try to keep regular work hours from like 10-ish to 6-ish. And those were really, really flexible, just depending on like when I got up that day or what I was doing. But I tried to keep a hard cutoff at like 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Anytime after 9 p.m., I am no longer allowed to do anything productive. I have to do something else. And whether that something else is like watching anime or playing a video game or reading a
Yeah.
book, anything like just something that is not work or crucially music related either,
Yeah.
like because I know so much of my music stuff now is as a hobbyist, but that is still work,
Yeah.
and it is still possible to overdo that. um so I kind of tried to keep regular ish hours. As for marketing, that's something that like it is definitely something that I am doing technically in that I am active on Twitter and Instagram, and people do know me from there, and sometimes I am approached about jobs and they directly reference like even the daily recording thread, like so that is technically marketing, but I got to confess it is not something that I actively think about all that much. Um
Hmm.
or at least I'm not thinking about it in terms of marketing. I do think like I think things like, oh, uh I should post music more often, or oh, I should maybe like find a sound design side project and post about
Mm.
that or something like that. But I'm not thinking of it in terms of marketing so much as I'm thinking of it, about it in terms of just like staying relevant, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's a depressing way to put it.
Yeah, it does sound sort of like a bit of an elder term. I need to stay relevant with the kids these
A little
days.
bit, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think those are they're
But
very,
like
yeah.
one thing is like besides the recording thread though, I don't post a lot about like sound design because right now all of my
Mm.
sound design energies are going to Arcane,
Yeah.
and everything I'm doing is under NDA.
Yeah.
So I can I can talk about it in like only the vaguest possible uh terms. And on the other side of it, I'll be able to like point to things in the game and be like, oh, I did the sounds for that, I did the sounds for that, but that's not going to be until it's released. So
Yeah.
until then, I'm just kind of I'm sitting on a lot of cool things that I've done
Yep.
that nobody's going to hear about for a very long time. So in
Yeah.
the meantime, I don't have a lot of sound design things to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good to see the jams and then see the daily recordings. And yeah, I think that that kind of structure is really important. I'll just look at the chat here, live event chat. So there's a comment from Bill that says, yeah, he also has ADHD and finds it easy to start, but almost impossible to finish. So he's trying to work on that. And so yeah, I appreciate like your feedback
Yeah.
on that because it's yeah, I don't my I've been contracting and freelancing a long time now, but I find that for me it sounds silly, but the challenge that I have is I there's things that are like big tasks that I don't want to do, and I have a really hard time starting those tasks and chipping away at them. So, I mean, it's I'm still working on those kind of things, say with the school or with my own work. But yeah, it's an
Mhm.
interesting struggle, and so it's cool to hear your approach to it. I have a question here from Ryan. It says, "Hi Emily, I am a senior in an audio engineering school, and I practice sound redesigns and other game audio stuff. I'm curious if you can relate to the feeling of not knowing how much practice is enough, or feeling like other people are practicing more than you, have more time, etc." More gear. How do you deal with that? Basically, like comparative.
Yeah, that is definitely like a feeling that I have had in the past, and it's one I still have now. It's
Yeah.
not going to go away, so I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
Bad
totally.
news. It's not That's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
I wish it was possible to get to a place where that was better, but I still am constantly like I constantly compare my work to other people's, and I think as a creative, that's just an inevitability. It's
Mm,
just something that you have to learn to live with. And so like and also gear envy. That's a real thing too.
yeah.
And Leonard and I, we were chatting about a little bit about this yesterday, but I always think whenever I post my synth jams online, the last thing I want to do is like make up and coming audio folks feel like, oh, I if I'm gonna make it, I need to buy all this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, when I mean, depending on what you want to do, you don't need to buy all of the stuff. You might need to buy like a few things here and there, but like uh I think it's really easy to like see somebody with like a gigantic, beautiful Eurorack setup and be like, oh man, if only I had that. Maybe
Yeah.
that's like the thing that would get me the career I want or would get me to be taken seriously in a very specific way that I want. But that's like but it's really not that simple. And and also it's easy to feel like, oh, all these other people are doing really really cool things, but like it's social media. You're only
Yeah.
seeing the hits, you know? You're not typically seeing the misses. And also it's easy to feel like, oh, all these people are posting redesigns, or oh, all these people are posting music clips and I haven't posted anything in so long, and I'm like just wasting away over here. But like that's just because a bunch of people are working towards their own goals simultaneously. It's not that like it just feels overwhelming
Mm,
because it's just you just see so much. But when you actually break it down into individuals and what individuals are doing, they're probably working at the same rate as you. So, um, a lot of how I deal with it is just kind of like my brain has an initial reaction, and then I take that reaction and I sit it down,
yeah.
and I'm like, okay, rationally though, have you considered this? And then I just kind of like calm that initial reaction down that way. Like a really common one is I'll see a somebody post a music work in progress, and my first response is, "Oh my god, I could never write something like that. I must be garbage." I
Yeah.
have to take that response and I have to sit it down, and I'm like, "Have you tried to write in that style, or do you even want to write in that style?"
Yeah.
And I have to think to myself, I have never written in that style, and I'm also not interested in trying. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, then why? why does it matter? Why does it matter
Yeah.
to the point that you actually feel bad about it? And I just kind of need to like talk myself down from that ledge. And the older I get, the easier it is for me to do that. It also just helps to like keep your head down and work on your stuff, you know?
Mm.
As long as you're making your own personal progress, you still have
Yep.
something to be proud of and satisfied with.
Exactly.
I always find it easier to deal with envy and stuff like that when I have my own thing that I'm working on and can kind of point to as like it's fine that I'm not involved with this cool thing because I got my own cool thing or
Yeah.
I got my own journey, you know?
Yeah, and I think exactly it's good to like the way I find to get better at things is it's a fine balance of finding inspiration in other people, but then also finding inspiration in yourself and also being very kind to yourself during that process of like, yes, like I want to be at this point at some time, like I want to improve, which as artists that's the way that that's the way we are. But it's also being kind to
Mhm.
yourself in the moment and going like, yeah, like if I wanted to do that style of music or I wanted to have this kind of sound design, to look at in the past a bit, I find like looking at where I was and trying it can be hard to be that introspective sometimes, but even just thinking like, oh yeah, like 2 years ago I was doing this, and sometimes even scrolling back to like stuff that I've done in the past and going like, I'm a different person, and like, yeah, I feel like I'm doing better, and even if it's not the same thing, it's just like, hey, I did that thing and I was able to figure it out. I could probably do this, but it's going to take time. I can't just like instantly look at something and go like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I'd love to be able to do like, prog rock chiptune." It's just like I just don't have those chops or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's a great thing to basically sort of, yeah, be introspective and just be kind to yourself in the process. So, yeah, that was a great
Mhm.
question. Let's try and grab
Yeah,
some more
and
here.
looking back on past work, that's a really big thing too, just being able to like even my Wise demo reel that I did for the School of Video Game Audio, like I have grown a lot since that reel. And um and thinking about that just every time I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm like actually up to snuff as a sound designer," then I always think like how far I've come. And that's significant and that always helps.
Yeah, that actually feeds really well into our next question, which is from Viral, and he says, "Thanks for doing the Q&A. I viewed your Wise and Unity demo reels. After more than 6 years, what would you do to change your reels? Like, what changes would you make? Because it sounds like you've done a new
Oh,
reel, so like just a couple. Let's pick out a
mhm.
sort of a few key points that other people might be able to glean some nuggets from."
Oh, geez. I mean, that's honestly really hard because I gotta be
Yeah,
honest, like my initial response is just redo everything. Just
burn
just
it.
like just do all the sounds over, do all the music over, like
Right.
keep the implementation the same. I think what I was doing implementation-wise was fine. Um, especially and, and actually, like, I've gotten compliments, from this one audio director I know uh, who watched my Wise and Unity demo reels, and he came back to me and he was like, "I was so impressed with them." And I was like, "Why? I did those years ago." And they don't sound, like, great or anything. Like, I mean, I think they sounded fine at the time, but, like, I'm so much better now. And
Mm,
and he was like, "Well, yeah, okay, the sounds or whatever, but, like, when you talked about, how you set up the implementation for the guns with the different layers set up in random containers, I was really impressed by that. I was impressed that you were thinking about that at that point in your life." Um, so I actually because of that, because I had that conversation, I actually do feel really good about what I was doing implementation-wise,
right.
um, in those reels. But now when I listen to them, I'm just like, well, and I they weren't even all that bad. There was I really liked the little spider leg sounds I made in the Unity reel. Like that was stuff I
Yep.
recorded myself. And oh, that's right. And I like made a little Arduino servo thing so
Oh
that I could
yeah.
record servo sounds but control them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a good idea. I
Yeah.
should do that more often. But I would redo, um, probably most of the, like, non-physical based sounds,
Mm-hmm.
like things like UI, things like magic.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably redo all the guns, just because my understanding of what makes a gun sound work has
Mm-hmm.
changed so much.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, now that I'm in AAA and, like, working on games with guns in them. My understanding of what makes a successful gun has just completely changed.
Yep.
Uh, so I guess those are a couple of specifics. I hope that helps.
No, I think that's great. Let's we have more questions streaming in already. So this is from Jordan.
Great.
What is the most unexpectedly great thing about freelancing as opposed to in-house? And is there an in-house gig that you would leave freelancing for?
Um, So, at least as far as this is like partially a freelancing thing, but it's also partially like a work from home thing.
Hmm.
I really like working in my home studio. Like I've added a lot. I've kind of built out my equipment arsenal since going freelance because now it's all tax write-offs
Yeah,
and it's very
totally.
easy to justify when uh when I'm no longer like every when I worked at Every, they paid for everything. And as soon as I got laid off and I realized that I could no longer like lean on that as a crutch, I had to lean on my own studio. I was like, okay, well there are a few things I need to buy right now, immediately, so that I can be uh professionally competitive, I
Yeah.
suppose. Um, it was mostly things like upgrading my monitors and like adding an additional mic to my arsenal, um, and I'm still working on soundproofing. I'm in talks with GIC Acoustics
Okay. Yeah.
um, about getting some more panels around. And those are things that I'm very lucky to be able to invest in them in the first place. And I wouldn't suggest that anybody like go into debt trying to get these same things that I am. I'm only able to do it because I can afford it in the first place.
Yeah.
But anyway, I love working in my home studio. I love working in this thing that I've kind of built myself. I also love having access to my kitchen and to my plants
Yeah.
and to my pets.
Aw.
um, and I like being able to kind of structure my own time. I love not having a commute.
Yeah.
Like it has been a pretty major improvement uh, on my life, I
Yeah.
would say. Just not having to sit in a car for an extra hour and a half every day, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So as far
And
as
as
oh,
for
sorry.
whether I would leave for oh, I'm sorry, I was as for whether I would leave for an in-house job, um I would, yeah. There are in-house jobs that out there that I would take if they were offered. But they have to be offered first, and that is it's very hard to get them to do that.
Yeah. Well,
So,
yeah.
never say never. But currently, I'm very happy to be with Arkane. I love working on Redfall, and I'm happy to be at Arkane for as long as they'll have me.
Nice. Well, that's great. Cool. We have another question here. So, do okay, Adriana asks, what inspires you most when working with sounds?
Hmm, that's a good question. Because like I get I think my inspiration, I don't typically get a lot of inspiration when I'm actually when I'm like actually actively working on a sound, I'm usually not feeling inspired. Not to say that I'm feeling bad,
Hmm.
but I'm usually too busy kind of thinking about like what I'm doing. Is something working? Is it not working? Like I'm too busy trying to solve problems and get from point A to point B. Uh, but um, when I'm not doing that, I'm inspired by a lot of things. I'm inspired by other games that I'm playing, like Right now, I'm playing 2 games right now. I'm playing Control
Mm-hmm.
and I'm playing Chicory: A Colorful Tale, which are
Yeah.
2 very, very different games with
Yes.
very different audio treatments, but they both sound wonderful, and every time I play them, I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, this, psychic attack sounds incredible," and it pops really well against the mix, or like I'm playing Chicory and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that sound that this little animal made was just so cute."
Yeah.
And and they did this really clever thing with the music implementation, and it's just absolutely so charming.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I kind of take that inspiration, and it kind of like keeps me recharged so that when I get back to work, I can go back to like, okay, let's solve this problem. Okay, is this sound working? Okay, let's get from point A to point B. And then I can come out of it and, you know, play a game and kind of recharge that energy. Um, Also, now that I've been doing my daily recording thread, I'm like a lot more in tune with the sounds around me. I pay
Mm.
so much more attention,
Mm-hmm.
and there's inspiration in that too. Like if I'm out and about and I hear something, well, usually if I'm out and about, I don't necessarily have a recorder on me, which I'm
Right.
trying to fix. I should have one on me at all times. But I think like, oh, okay, that there's this kind of sound. Like, where would I use this in a game, or what would I use it for? Like, what kind of sound would I use this as a layer in, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. The I know that when I record stuff around my house that I've used in games, when it's a layer in a sound, when I'm like, playing the game, like, whatever, sometimes years later, then it's just like, oh yeah, there's definitely like a sense of like, I don't know, where that sound is kind of like wrapped up in little time periods, similar to like, when working on music, where it's just like, oh yeah, I remember like when I used to have that, bass guitar or something like that. It's definitely gives
Totally.
a sort of, it's like has a certain sense of nostalgia, or like there's a little memory package that goes around certain sounds and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to record stuff around your house. Okay, so this is Dominic, or Dom. Hey Emily, great to have you here. So I'm curious because I always thought working in AAA and freelancing as being completely separate things. But so a bit of a silly and open-ended question, but how does freelancing for a AAA studio work exactly? Like when, why do companies choose to take on contractors as opposed to hiring someone in-house?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is actually something like when I was like just starting out when I was in college, I had so little understanding of like how this worked. And then like I went almost immediately into like my first contract. So I learned pretty quickly that this is just a thing sometimes. So my answer might be a tiny bit depressing, but hopefully not. So it is very common for studios to not. As for why they might hire a contractor as opposed to hire somebody full time, there are a lot of studios out there that want to spend as little money as possible on audio. This is why we typically see a lot of very small audio departments. Edge of Reality had one audio person. That's probably why they hired me on, because they were working on 2 games at the time and they had one audio person. So they were like, oh, okay, this delivery driver wants to work here. Well, honestly, we could actually use the extra help. Um, so yeah, so and it's not like this only happens in audio. It's actually like pretty common for AAA studios to hire contractors to provide a service that they just don't have in house, or just like pad out a department just so they can like meet a milestone. Uh, right now, I've actually seen like a few contract positions available in Austin, and I've taken a couple of them myself. So there's that. I know that BioWare Austin has been looking for someone for a while to just like help them out for a few months and then move on. And And also, there are a lot of like game audio outsourcing teams.
Yeah.
It's not at all uncommon for a studio who maybe either doesn't have a sound department in the first place, or they do, but they just need extra help to hire not just like an individual contractor, but an entire team. So here in Austin, we have Team Audio. They've worked on a lot of big games. The only one I could think of off the top of my head is they did some work for Death Stranding, which is obviously a very big gig.
Hmm.
And we also have Gleek here
Yeah.
in town.
Yes. Fun.
They've done, yeah, they've done a ton of stuff. They helped out with
Yeah.
Prey. They they did oh, a local game that came out here that I can't remember the name, but they've done a ton of work here.
Hmm.
There's Power Up Audio. They mostly work in the indie space, but
Yeah,
they did
they're
all of the sound design for Celeste.
exactly. They're
Yeah,
based in
and
Vancouver.
of course, Shell in the Pit.
Yeah, here too.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah,
then of course,
also
yeah,
there.
yeah, they
And
did Chicory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, they did Chicory, and they also did Night in the Woods, which is like one of my favorite sounding games of, and also a favorite game just in general. If
Hmm.
y'all haven't played Night in the Woods, you should. It's great. Um, but yeah, so yeah, contracting audio folks is a totally normal thing. It is I think it is probably like it's probably easier to be like an individual contractor if you're like willing to move around a bit, or it might kind of depend on where you live. Um, I think it is very possible for me to reach a point in Austin where I just won't be able to work for a while just because I just won't be able to find anybody who needs anything.
Mm.
Um, but you know, that's why I luckily can apply my skills to other things like I don't know, editing podcasts, audiobooks, audio for video, you know, things like that.
Yeah, and just music in general, maybe not for games, put out
Yeah, sure.
something there too. Know that playing music can have sometimes it has financial aspects, but it's definitely I've found it personally
Sometimes,
difficult to survive.
if
I
you're
like,
lucky.
yeah, I know I like playing live, but I know that for some contacts that I have, what can happen as you basically get more experience as a contractor is that it can be difficult to simply get paid appropriately because they're just
Mhm.
like, hey, it's that combination of like, well, we want to spend as little money on audio as we can, but we also want to contract somebody and we'd like to get really great audio, but every time we've gotten somebody to do audio, we paid them this amount, and so we're not really prepared to pay more than that. So I found that some people that do contracting run into it's sort of like a bit of a, it's not necessarily a glass ceiling, but it's kind of like running out of oxygen or whatever you want to call it. It's a very
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing to try to get past. So diversifying is a great way to sort of get around those kind of issues, especially because sometimes with contracting, when it rains, it pours, and you can have like two or three possibilities at once. So sometimes people that are more experienced, they also bring in subcontractors. I've done that, with the eco game that I'm working on to get some help on it. And sometimes also, yeah, people from that, they, like Team Audio, I think that it sort of grew out of that. It's just like, well, we want to be able to get larger contracts, and so we'll bring in people as we need it. And same thing, obviously, with Shoal in the Pit and Power Up and all those folks do this. That a lot of those sort of contracting kind of outsourcing companies, the smaller ones, sort of grew out of that kind of need of where there's somebody that's inside there that's like gotten to the point of like either they have too much work or they're wanting to drag bigger contracts down that they simply can't do themselves.
Totally.
So yeah, I'll look at some more questions here. Got to switch over to the chat, and feel free to continue to ask questions. Okay, so Damien asks, so showing implementation can be difficult. So any additional suggestions on how to illustrate the thought and integration process for integration?
Like in terms of like a demo reel, or in terms
Yeah.
of just like
Yeah, I think he's curious on how one basically could sort of spread that information out there. Like, yes, I know how to integrate stuff as a technical audio, designer. How do I broadcast that I know how to do that knowledge? Like,
that's I don't consider myself all that much of a technical sound designer, although
Right.
I do a lot of implementation. I just
Okay.
never do anything all that complicated. But so
Yeah.
my initial thought though is that games are a visual medium,
Yes.
and so I if I'm trying to show something off implementation wise, or if I'm trying to describe something in terms of implementation, I have found it a lot easier to just show them what I'm talking about. Like, let's say hypothetically, I'm talking to a programmer about a specific thing that I want. I might try to find game footage of a different game that like did the thing that I want, just so they can like hear it and understand. Like, oh, okay, I see. You want this transition to happen when this happens, or you want a sort of effect that sounds like what I am hearing now. If I was doing this in terms of like a reel, I would probably like show gameplay footage of the implementation trick in question, and then immediately after that, just kind of describe succinctly,
Hmm.
sort of how I went about hooking that up and kind of what the thought process was behind that. Um, and yeah, I mean, it ultimately just comes down to games are a visual medium. It's going to be a lot easier to I mean, I guess this is kind of in the context of, like, people who, like, uh, are not necessarily game audio people, but I think it's a lot easier to get them to understand when you show them just, like, visually and orally at the same time, like, what it is that you're going for.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's a great answer. I mean, I deal a lot with that with the school because there's, we that's the focus of the courses is to produce a demo reel, and I find that sort of a common failing is kind of where people they over explain, like they tell rather than
Mhm.
show, and it can be very hard to just tell people like, well, why are you doing this? Like, what is your artistic idea of doing this? But they can often, it's sort of the left brain, right brain kind of divide, where it's just like, yeah, but I'm describing the thing. It's just like, yeah, but nobody really cares that much. Like, I mean, people do, but like you can gloss over that, but like the end sort of like artistic result is really what's important. So yeah, it's showing and yeah, like basically making it very visual and oral for people is, yeah, it's a great approach. um, Viral has asked a question before, so I'm going to skip down to Nicholas right now. So Nicholas asks, keeping in mind the idea of showing implementation and sound design in a reel, how do you balance them in the little time that you have? Is it better to make two different reels for music and sound design, or sorry, for implementation and sound design?
Yes. Yes, it is. So, like, I mean, so the first demo reels I did, were the Wise and Unreal not Wise and Unreal, I'm sorry, Wise and Unity reels that I did with the School of Video Game Audio, and they were very good for very specifically showing off what I can do with implementation. And it actually was my Wise reel. Um, that when I got hired on at Every, they told me like, okay, well, we don't use Wise, but we saw your Wise reel and we watched it, and yeah, we don't use Wise, but we use uh, something similar, and this showed that you understood implementation concepts, and that was really all that was needed. Um, so I absolutely think that sound design and implementation should be separate reels,
Hmm.
just for like the sake of time. Um,
Yeah.
and just for like the sake of like your sanity, like
Right.
you want to keep your reel short, and trying to show off both of those skills simultaneously in a short reel sounds like a nightmare. um so yeah, I would do the way that I try to do it is if I'm doing a sound design reel, I do either like footage from games I've worked on or sound redesigns, and I do like a minute, just like a minute of those clips, and clearly mark them and label them and all of that, and just to have like a minute of your best sound design work. And then implementation, you have more wiggle room for that. So I always kind of think of and I mean, this depends on the job, of course, but I always kind of think of the sound design reel as kind of the first thing they see. And And if they hate it, then they don't see anything else. They just move
Yep.
on. But if they like it, then they can move to the implementation reel. They could be like, oh, okay, so she could design sounds. Let's see how she's thinking about sounds in terms of systems. And that's why you have the implementation reel, to show that not only can you make the sounds, you can also think about the way that you would use them in game.
This is awesome, because this is exactly what I've been telling students. It's exactly the same. So I've been
Good.
saying, like, basically, and we didn't coordinate this particular chunk before the talk, but it's like, I'm telling students these days, like, please keep your reel about 1 or 2 minutes long, show the sound design, basically focus on the sound so that somebody that has like no time can go through it really quickly and go through like 50 or whatever, and just pretend that you're a little chunk, a little bit in there, as and try and make it so it's easier to get your contact info, like you said, like label it correctly. And then if you want to start explaining things with the implementation, like 5 minute ish kind of like sort of like what do you say, making of or sort of detail thing, then yeah, you can go there and do it that way. But that's great that lines up perfectly. And so yeah, we're at noon now, or actually at the end of the noon hour for you. So how are you for time right now?
I could maybe answer like one or two more questions, like
Sounds
real
great.
quick, if
Yep,
that's okay. And if you
exactly.
miss any questions, like my Twitter handle is right there on that slide. Feel free to DM me, or you don't even have to DM me. You could just like at me on Twitter, and I'll get to it whenever I get to it.
No, that's great. Thanks for that. So we'll tail out with a couple more questions here. So, okay, so we do have two questions. So I'll take one from Tom here and then finish with Viral. So, hi Emily, thanks for doing the QA. What advice or tips do you have for keeping up to date with new technical features of engines and middleware when working as a freelancer? I find it challenging at times to keep up to date with Unreal, Unity, Fmod, Wise all at once. Yeah,
A
that's a
wonderful
challenge.
question. And
Yeah.
I think wanting to do that is a wonderful sentiment. I don't do that. I just don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm too busy. I'm
Yeah.
like I really only focus on like what I am doing for the project that I'm on. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily how people should do it. That's just kind of what I'm doing now. Um if somebody else figures out how best to do this, I'd love to hear about it, because
Yeah.
as I have just revealed, I have yet to figure that out.
Well, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like sometimes I'm able to kind of keep up on things because I'm on Game Audio Twitter, and if something comes out with like a really interesting update, people will be talking about it. So I can kind of like ambiently pick things up, but
Hmm.
that's just for like kind of high level big feature things, like if like there's a big Ableton update or a big Reaper update or something like that, I can usually kind of like be aware of that because I use both of those programs. That helps too. But when it comes to Wise updates, when it comes to engine updates, I typically do not. Uh, I do not pay attention to those until I am actually using that engine, and I happen to be like using a version with that update. Then I'll go in there and be like, "Oh, I could do this now. This is great." But as for preemptively paying attention, I do not do that. I probably should.
Well, it's a lot of extra time, and honestly, yeah, similarly, most people that are working at your level don't have the time and bandwidth either. I will say, to throw in a sort of thinly veiled, advert for the school, sort of spam alert, but we do have students that, because the program is only 2 months long, that I do have like people that basically are just like, oh my gosh, I need to learn this thing now, and like I have a contract coming up, or I'm whatever, there's the company is like ramping up on this thing, and I just need to learn this thing quite quickly. So
Mhm.
the school actually does quite well with that, because I can open up the entire courseware to people that are really wanting to fly through it. And the nice thing as well is that I can give direct feedback if it's just like, okay, yeah, this meta sounds thing or whatever, I don't quite understand what this does, and then there can be a back and forth and stuff. So there actually have been a good number of, yeah, people that are quite advanced. So either audio directors that, where they might not necessarily be the people doing the implementation, they're delegating the work to other people, but they need to understand the overall
Mm.
concept so that they don't trip things up with the people that really know what they're doing, so that they can at least speak at an, and like a pretty, yeah, like this, so that they understand how the technology works, but they don't spend like a lot of time like fiddling around with things. It's basically, that's the reason why the course is quite streamlined. So that, I will say that that's part of the reason why, at least that's what I see, some people that are more advanced that are taking the course, where there's not necessarily a lot of where they're like, hey, like I'm really interested in connecting, with the community and stuff, which it's not that they don't like people, it's just that they don't have time. So
Sure.
it's anyways,
Yeah.
that is one approach. And the approach that I have is simply that, like, I kind of have to, because I'm teaching the school. But if I wasn't doing that, then yeah, I would probably just simply focus my attention onto one particular technology and just stick with that. So I wouldn't try and like know Unreal and Unity. I would just pick one, and then like Wise and Fmod, I might just pick one there too. So anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. And so let's see, because okay, we've got okay, let's wrap with this one here. So Virel has a question. So he says, besides the obvious, sound design and implementation, what other skills would you say are sought after by employers?
Oh yeah, great question. Honestly, a lot of soft skills, a lot of
Yeah,
communication skills, time management, things like that. Being able to take and interpret feedback is super 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 important. Being able to like not take critical feedback personally, because like sometimes you make a sound and it doesn't work, and it doesn't mean you're a bad sound designer. It just means that you do what all sound designers do, which is iterate.
yeah.
Like I never assume that I'm gonna get it right on the first try, like game development is a process. But yeah, just being able to communicate with people outside of your department, or yeah, of course within your department. But I have found it to be really, really valuable to be able to communicate with programmers. So I've actually like taken some programming classes and learned some of the lingo just so I can like better uh, kind of not speak entirely the same language, but
Mm,
at least I can kind of bridge some of those gaps and just make it just easier for me to communicate the things I want to them, but also I want to make it easier for them to talk to me, because it's really important to keep those relationships like strong and communicative. I always think that over communicating is way better than under communicating, especially in like a collaborative environment like game development. So yeah, I think besides being good at sound design and implementation, you want to be like a really good collaborator. To you want to be a positive presence. You
yeah.
want to be somebody who is easy to work with and flexible as well. So, like, game development is just, it's a process with a lot of curveballs, and it doesn't matter what department you're in. There are always curveballs. There's always something that goes wrong. There's always like a schedule that gets totally shuffled around, and you need to just have like a certain amount of flexibility. You need to be able to adjust to new situations and just kind of take it in stride and, just do your best to get the work done and communicate every step of the way. It's soft skills for days. People
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. I definitely would say that, everybody that works in a game company, they're obviously people, but they also, like, when you show to a coder that you're willing to like learn a little bit of their language, it's kind of like, speaking a little Spanglish, or, whatever you want to call it. It's like code-ish, where, you're showing that you care about what they do. And it's the same thing if you're working with the art team, where you just sort of learn a little bit more of their process. And then sometimes, you can help things, like a lot of the time it's where if nobody is willing to go outside of their domain, then it's kind of like you have a gap. And so it's really important to use, like you say, those soft skills to really connect with people, and know that that's, in a general thing of what life is all about. Just because you're working doesn't mean it's just like, oh man, how much money have I made? It really is about personal relationships. It's about living, life and connecting with people. So Yeah, well,
Totally.
and so yeah, thanks so much for your time, Emily. It's been really great. I guess what folks can do is that you can head over to the live event chat and just sort of wrap up there so people can say thank you and hello and all that business in the live event. You don't have to ask questions. And then, yeah, basically, Emily, you can leave your contact information there. And then also maybe in the general chat as well. So for people that weren't able to join, and yeah, no, it's been a great time. So thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, and everyone who showed up. Thank you so much for showing up. This was fun.
Cool, awesome. Well, this is basically a chat with the School of Video Game Audio, so you can check us out at sovga.com. And yeah, hopefully we'll continue to do these, and hopefully this recorded. So for people that weren't able to join us, we'll have that available to you as well. So yeah, thanks again.
All right. Thanks so
Cool.
much, y'all. Have a
Okay,
good one.
ciao. Bye.